Hello, and thanks for being a volunteer interviewer for our upcoming statewide homeless survey. I'm Jackie Amen, a researcher at Wilder Research.
And I'm Maddie Hansen, also a researcher at Wilder Research, and we really appreciate the time that you're taking to watch our training videos.
Over the next few minutes, Maddie and I will share some basic instructions for how to conduct a social science interview. Since we can never improve on the data once it is collected, the more prepared you are before conducting the interviews, the better our data will be. This is one of 2 training segments we've developed for this year's homeless volunteers. Even if you have been involved in this study before, it is important to watch the training videos. This training segment will help you to remain neutral and objective during the interview, and also avoid doing things that may bias the respondents' answers. Those of you who have participated as a volunteer interviewer before or have experience in conducting interviews for research know that one of the most important elements of this process is for each interviewer to administer the interview in a similar way and, as much as possible, avoid influencing the respondents' answers because of your own biases or concerns. It's also important to keep in mind that an interviewer is in a unique and privileged position.
As interviewers, you'll be asking individuals a variety of personal questions, and your responsibility and promise to them is that you'll keep this information confidential and not share it with others. As you're conducting the interviews, we ask that you maintain the confidentiality of respondents by not repeating their name or anything that they say during the interview, by not interviewing anyone you know, and by using appropriate means of handling any study materials that might identify respondents. This agreement between the interviewer and the respondent is really important to making people feel safe and comfortable during the interview. Unlike information collected as part of a service record or a client form, there's no information collected in our survey that will allow us to link the answers to individual people. As an interviewer, you're the face of this study, and your work as an objective and neutral scientific observer is critical. So now let's get to the basic rules for conducting an interview. And if it's helpful, you can follow along in your interviewer instruction sheet. So first, read the introduction and follow the screening instructions on the first page of the interview. Again, it's really important for respondents to understand that the comments they say will be kept confidential and that their participation is voluntary. Second, read the questions exactly as they're worded on the questionnaire, without adding or deleting or subtracting anything. Asking the questions in the exact same way across all interviews ensures that there's more consistency in the responses. Third, read the entire question before accepting an answer. Sometimes respondents want to answer a question before you've finished reading it, but it is important that respondents hear the entire question before you accept an answer. If respondents interrupt, try to do your best to continue reading the question.
Fourth, ask each respondent every appropriate question in the appropriate order. The interview has instructions to guide you, letting you know where it is appropriate to skip over a question or to ask a follow-up question because of a respondent's answer. Here's a tip. Practicing this interview with someone you know beforehand will help you to get familiar with the order and the skip patterns in the questions. You will be amazed how much easier the interview goes once you've practiced the interview a few times. Fifth, don't skip over a question because you think you know the answer or because the respondent has given a similar answer previously. Although this is tempting because you think that the respondent has already answered the question, always ask each question in its entirety. It might feel awkward doing this, so you can always preface the question by saying, "I know we've talked about this previously, but I need to ask each of the questions in the survey." Or you can always blame us, the research staff at Wilder, for having to follow these seemingly rigid rules.
6. Avoid direct references to past responses. Don't assume that an answer you get in passing is a correct answer to a particular question at a different point in the interview. And don't direct the respondent by referencing a response to a previous question. If the answer is different from the answer that you expect, don't remind the respondent of an earlier remark or try to force consistency. 7. Clarify questions only if the respondent requests more information. There are 3 basic types of clarifications to keep handy as you conduct interviews. So first, Repeat all or part of the question. Second, you can use other strategies like neutral probing that we'll outline a bit later. Or third, you can feel free to use the phrase, whatever that means to you, when the respondent asks a question and your response would endanger your role as an objective interviewer. 8. When you're asked to repeat one response option, repeat all of the options given in the question. This will avoid biasing the respondent towards one particular answer option.
9. If you feel the respondent has not directly answered the question, probe for further clarification. However, remain neutral even while you're probing. Effective probing requires knowing the question objectives and listening actively to the respondent to decide whether or not the objectives have been met. This is another reason why it is important to familiarize yourself with the interview beforehand by conducting the interview with a friend or a family member prior to the survey night. If you do need to probe for clarification during the interview, here are some of the acceptable probes you can use. Pause. In this way, you let the respondent know that you expect them to continue the response. Another method is to repeat the question or part of the question. Another way is to ask, "What do you mean?" or "How do you mean that?" Yet another strategy is to say, "Tell me more about what you are thinking," or "what you mean," or which would be closer to the way you feel. 10. Probe a "don't know" response at least once. When a respondent answers "don't know," consider what they might mean. It could mean that they don't understand the question, or they simply need more time to think about their response. The most effective probe for a "don't know" response is either to repeat the question or to pause. Remember, the respondent may refuse to answer any question, so use your best judgment about when to stop probing.
11. Give the respondent feedback as you go through the interview. Even though you're not offering feedback in the interview regarding your own opinions or ideas, it is important for the respondent to know that you're listening and that you're interested in his or her responses. You can use simple phrases like, "I see," or "It's helpful to know your thoughts on that," or "Thanks for that answer." If the respondent asks for your opinion about a particular question or issue, let them know that you'd be happy to talk about this in more detail at the end of the interview. 12. Avoid needless digression. Sometimes the respondent wants to give you more information than you've asked for, or they'll go off on a tangent. So try to pull the respondent back to the interview by simply repeating the question or letting them know that you'd be willing to talk more about this at the end of the interview.
13. Read the questions at a reasonable pace. Even if you have already read the question many times before, this is the first time the respondent is hearing it. Try to pick up on cues from the respondent regarding the pace that is most appropriate. But it is important not to read the interview either too fast or too slow. It's also important that you try to get into a rhythm with the survey, which is comfortable for the respondent and which moves the interview along at a reasonable pace. 14. And most importantly, make sure to thank the respondent when the interview is complete. Let them know how much you appreciate the time they have taken to do the interview.
Okay, that's the end of this segment of our training. Thank you again for participating as a volunteer interviewer in our study. The study depends on people like you.
If you have any questions, you can find dates, contact information, and other details at www.mnhomeless.org. Again, thanks for volunteering for this important work.
And thank you for participating in our interviewer training.